Hi everybody, I'm Kevin Buist. I'm Artistic Director of ArtPrize. I'm here with Jori.
Hi everybody, Jori Bennett, Executive Director at ArtPrize.
Today we're going to do a little Facebook Live broadcast and recap our Project One artist announcement, which we did last week. Tell you a bit more about what this means and this sort of transition point in the ArtPrize organization, as well as who these artists are, how we selected them, and most importantly, how you can get involved and what to look for next.
Yeah, so before we kind of dive into that, it might be helpful to sort of reflect on where we've been. So many of you know ArtPrize launched in 2009. We really were started as an experiment. And of course that experiment went gangbusters, and here we are today, 10 years later, having produced 10 art prizes over the years. Kevin, you were there from the beginning.
I was.
Yeah.
I was.
Which is pretty cool. And really, I think our founding principle really was that we are an evolving experiment. We want to keep the fall really exciting for our visitors, and so yeah, we're excited to take on this next new pivot for the organization.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people ask us, why did you make this change? Like, why switch the competition to a biennial and do these commissions in every other year? And really, a lot of the thinking around this idea came out of the work that we were doing with ArtPrize, particularly with these grant programs that we've added to ArtPrize in the last couple of years, and you may have heard us talk about these or read some signage that's around the event. In particular, there's a grant program called Featured Public Projects, which is the way for the last couple of years that we've determined which artworks are placed in places like the Grand River and on pedestrian bridges and in major parks downtown. And those are obviously great spots for large public artworks to be during ArtPrize, but also we fund those projects. And so we're raising money from a bunch of different sources and giving those funds to artists.
Yeah, the Red Crocodile project that was climbing up the hill over by the Ford last year during ArtPrize, that was one of our grantees. It came in from Milan?
Yes, that was from Milan, Italy. Collaborations through that program with places like the Graham, where we did that large projection of videos of these owls on the side of the art museum. We've done a lot of really great stuff with that program, and it's been super exciting. And so we started to think, though, how could we balance holding a competition, but also investing directly in artists. And we started to realize that we could do so much more with some really cutting-edge public artists who are doing amazing stuff all over the world if we alternated when we do a competition and when we really double down on the commission piece of it. And so with Project One, this allows us to really collaborate with artists rather than being in a position of officiating a competition. So it's super exciting. So the relationship that we have with artists in this event is quite a bit different in a good way.
Yeah, I agree. And so with that, we're excited to talk about what we announced last week, the artists that will be engaging this year. There's 5 of them. And Kevin, you want to set up a little bit about what makes Project One different?
Yeah, as I was saying, we're able to collaborate more directly with artists. What this means is that sort of the resources that we work hard to fundraise all year is a lot of that is going toward these commissions for artist projects, and we're doing that in lieu of prizes. And so there's no voting, there's no juror, no jury. There's just commissions for these artist projects. And so what that means is that we're already working, we've been talking for months actually, with these artists about how to do these really incredible projects all throughout Grand Rapids. So the other thing that we can do with that that's different from ArtPrize is that we can be a lot more deliberate about where we're placing and installing these artworks. And so we're thinking about the downtown core, obviously, because that's kind of the place that people love to come during ArtPrize and expect to see a lot of cool art, and there will be. But we can also think about neighborhoods in other parts of the city that ArtPrize doesn't usually address, or if it does, it's in a smaller way. And so we're really looking forward to kind of focusing on where we're placing these artists in the city.
Yeah, and I think to add to that too, not only placement and artists, but also we're challenging these artists with how they're engaging with audiences.
Yeah.
So as you all know, the public vote is a big way that people participate in ArtPrize years. in project years, we're excited for our artists to really take the lead on what that looks like. And so we're going to talk a little bit about each of our artists and how they're doing that. But I think that's going to be a really phenomenal way for the community and our volunteers and our students that come for field trips. It's going to be exciting to see the different opportunities they'll have to get involved with the art in new ways.
Yeah, and that's one thing I think is really unique and dynamic about ArtPrize since its beginning is this idea of the public vote gave people something to do and a way to be involved in what was happening. And so it's an art event, but it's not just about what you look at, it's also about what do. You come down to do something and to be involved. And so we're really carrying that spirit over into how we're thinking about artist selection for Project One, because we're thinking about not only what do people see, but how do they get involved and what do they do and how can they interact with these different projects. And so as we talk more about them, you'll begin to see like that's pretty central to the way that these artists work.
Yeah, and then last but not least, before we jump into each of the artists, can you talk a little bit about the theme that we've set for Project One, Kevin?
Yeah, so that's another thing that's unique that we can do with Project One and the project series going forward is that we can, align these artists around a set of ideas and questions and a certain sort of theme that can tie that all together. And so the exhibition has a title, which is Crossed Lines. And so we're thinking about the way that artists can help us think through the differences between public and private space and the way that lines are drawn in a city. Lines both as paths and lines as boundaries. There's certain places where we feel like we belong in a city and we feel like we're at home, even if we're out in public space. And certain times where we don't feel like we belong and we don't feel like we're at home, even if it's quote unquote public space. And those are those are tricky issues, and a lot of artists are doing a lot of innovative work in helping audiences think through those things. Yeah. And sometimes those conversations are really fun and sometimes they're a little bit more challenging. But we're really excited to dive in with artists and kind of dig into some of those questions.
Yeah. So let's kick it off with our first artist, Amanda Browder. Her work is made possible by X-Rite and Pantone. They're underwriting her project, which we're super excited about. Amanda's based in Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. She's actually been to the city and done a site visit. Super excited about bringing her work to Grand Rapids. She produces these large-scale fabric installations that literally wrap the exteriors of buildings and structures. And they're colorful, they're bright, they're magnificent from a visual standpoint. But what we love so much about her process and her work is she engages the communities in which she's citing that work, and she does that a couple ways. First, she's asking for donations from the community to actually donate the fabric that she'll use to sew these structures, these pieces that'll wrap the buildings. So for the community here, that's one way to get involved is go check out your fabric that you've got lying around the house and see if you can part with it and have it be part of Project One this year. But second to that, she also invites the community to come out and sew alongside her and actually help construct the works. And so that's something we're really excited to collaborate with her on, is hosting many of these sew-in events that will take place over the summer months in the lead up to September when everything will be installed. Yep. Anything else you want to add on that?
Yeah, I mentioned earlier that Project One will focus on downtown as well as some neighborhoods that are not downtown. And the thing that we announced last week and that we're kind of reviewing today are who these artists are and what their work is like, but we're not yet announcing what their specific pieces are or where they're going to be installed. And so for an artist like Amanda, that's super important, because the first question when you see these images of past work, which we've been circulating on our social feeds and wherever else, of these amazing past projects in Buffalo, New York, and other places where she's wrapped incredible buildings, everyone wants to know, like, well, what building in Grand Rapids are you going to wrap? There will be several, but we're not yet announcing exactly where those are. So stay tuned for that. And so the exact locations and neighborhoods in which those buildings are going to be located is going to come later in the spring. And then also the other thing that we're going to be announcing pretty soon is the schedule of some of those sewing events where you can come and help out.
Yeah, and you don't have to sew to participate. She takes people from all sort of levels, whether you've never sewn.
It's a good way to learn to sew, because what you're doing is sewing a straight line, and it doesn't have to be incredibly precise. So if you want to learn to sew, you can actually you can come and it's a lot of fun.
All right. So that's Amanda.
Yeah. So the next is Heather Hart. Heather Hart's work for ArtPrize is underwritten by Herman Miller Cares. Heather Hart's also based in Brooklyn, and she creates these sculptures that mimic the form of different forms of architecture, like rooftops and porches and stoops. And she's thinking a lot about oral histories and the way stories are passed down, architectural forms, and things like carpentry practices can also be passed down from generation to generation. Thinking also, of course, a lot about housing and issues of housing. Her father was a carpenter, and she makes these rooftop sculptures with dormer windows that kind of mimic her childhood home. And these sculptures also function literally as stages. And so if you see images that we've been circulating of past work, there's events, and we'll throw events as well. And she's done events in the past where she invites music and even dance, spoken word performance, poetry to happen on these roofs and to use them as stages.
Yeah, she likes to say that her work isn't complete until the community activates and uses the stages, and we just love that. When we were initially talking to her, it seemed like a really great fit for the participation that we were looking for artists to generate. And it'll be really fun for us to have local performance artists and groups and musicians. You really work with her and take advantage of having those stages as part of Project One. So we're super excited about her work. Yeah,
and hers isn't the only one like that really needs this kind of performance activation to really come to life. And we're excited about that because one thing with Project One that we didn't mention earlier, but we've talked about in other moments, is that it's longer than ArtPrize. So ArtPrize is 2.5 weeks. Project One is going to be 7 weeks, and so the kind of event cadence is going to feel a little bit different. And so that's why things like these artworks that can host performance programming and other kinds of community programming, those things become really important because it's not the kind of like sort of jam-packed 2.5 weeks that ArtPrize is. It's spread out a bit more. So we're going to focus different kind of performance events and community events at different times and different locations.
Yeah, so if you're thinking like, gosh, I always have my family come in from Chicago or from out of town and we walk around ArtPrize, we're really focusing on the Saturdays during Project One. So there's 7 or 8 Saturdays that will have things happening on different things happening on different Saturdays, and we'll post that schedule as we get closer into the summer. But really look forward to I think those Saturdays and what we'll be posting as far as the performances that'll be taking place. Some of the opening celebrations that'll be happening that first weekend. There'll be a lot going on, a lot to do. But also a lot to see if you're just out and about and wanting to explore on your own during the week. It'll be pretty cool. Our third artist, Rafael Lozano Hemmer. He's a Mexican-Canadian artist based out of Montreal. He really is developing these interactive installations that sort of blend architecture and performance art. So a lot of his work and some of the work that we've posted imagery-wise showcases lighting as a kind of core component of his pieces, but also audio plays a big role in some of his installations. You want to talk more about that?
Yeah, if I encourage you to go to his website, just Google his name and go to his website, because he's been doing installations like this for a couple decades now and has just a really incredible catalog of work that he's done all over the world. And these installations that use light and sound and sometimes water vapor and other technologies that are very interactive and responsive to the audience in these really fun and engaging ways, but also really poetic, and it's more than just a light show. He's got there's a lot of depth in what he's exploring as well. And we're not announcing yet exactly what his project will be, but it will be a new work, and
it's gonna be cool.
And where it is also coming later. So stay tuned for that. But he does really phenomenal work.
Yeah, would you say he's sort of on the bleeding edge of really creating these art installations that are using technology, sort of that's just coming out and emerging?
Yeah, definitely. And he has an entire. I visited his studio in Montreal, and he has an entire team of people who are building proprietary technology. They're writing the code for these things because they're the way that they interact is incredibly complex. And so he has a whole team of people. And so the way that technology is being integrated is really impressive and unique among most artists.
Yeah, and what about the visitor engagement standpoint with Rafael's work? How is he challenging participants and visitors to interact with his work?
Well, again, if you look at a lot of his past projects, you'll see pretty quickly that he's building these environments and these interactive technologies that aren't really much of anything until the audience interacts. And so he's built things that react to the viewer's pulse. So there's a place where you grab and it takes your pulse, and there's a light installation that follows your pulse. There are things that react to the sound of your voice. There are things that use facial recognition technology to sort of to grab people's faces and then put them in a matrix of a projection. And so it's one of those things where everybody's experience of this artwork is different because you really have to be there, and it sort of needs this human feedback. And so it's really about this kind of bleeding edge between human interaction and how technology mediates that.
Yeah, and I think we're excited about that because we know our visitors really love that interactive quality. When we've had pieces like that at ArtPrize, they've really been very popular. And so we felt like Rafael was really good fit that way.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of people doing sort of creative technologists and even companies and things who are doing sort of a gee whiz, isn't that neat kind of version of this. But Rafael is somebody that we're so excited to be working with because he's really a pioneer. And he's really an artist first, and the technology serves that artistic vision. And so it's not just sort of what can this tech do and isn't it neat? It's there's always a deeper level, and there's always kind of a more poetic dimension to it.
Awesome. All right, so our fourth artist, Aleikum Jeffers.
Yes.
Can you talk about him?
Yeah. So Aleikum Jeffers is a Nigerian-born artist and architect who's based in Brooklyn, who has a really wide-ranging practice from public art and murals, installation, drawing, collage, and then more traditional architecture and design practices as well. He's somebody who's thinking a lot about the potential future and the past of urban environments. He's really influenced by Afrofuturism and protest movements, and some of his work takes a critical look at surveillance. And so it's very timely, and it's kind of taking this African and non-Western point of view on politics and urbanism and urban design and the way that all those things are totally intertwined and interact. And so he's working on a really large sculpture project for Project One, which will kind of look at some ideas around housing discrimination and access to housing and things like that.
Yeah, and he goes by Leek. So Leek's background, he's an architect and artist, which I think is really interesting for Project One and some of the works that we're exploring, and also towards the theme.
Yeah, the architecture thing keeps running through pretty much everything, in case you haven't figured that out. Yeah,
which is really cool. And last but not least, our artist pair, Paul Menta and Ted Lott.
Yeah, so Paul Menta and Ted Lott are going to be working in close collaboration with Disart. You may know Paul because he's one of the kind of principal organizers behind SiteLab, which of course has done really phenomenal ArtPrize venues for most years that ArtPrize has happened.
And Paul and Ted are based here in Grand Rapids.
Yes, yep. Yeah, so Paul's based in Grand Rapids, and Ted Lott is a really well-known and well-respected local architect who's done a lot of really great projects, building projects around town. And they've worked together before. They did a piece together with another artist called Alois Kronslager. And that piece was called Hybrid Structures that they did at SiteLab in 2016. And that was a part of a collaboration with Disart, which is a arts advocacy organization looking at the intersection of disability and the arts. And that's also locally based, and Disart does consulting, and they've run a festival, and they've done a lot of other really great things. They curated an exhibition that was a part of ArtPrize at Frederick Meyer Gardens last year, if you saw, really incredible exhibition. But this collaboration with Paul and Ted and working closely with Disart has been ongoing for a number of years, starting with some of those SiteLab things a few years ago, and also a few other projects in Miami and other places. So we're super excited about what they're going to make. Again, we're not yet announcing the installation location, which is because they're doing a thing that's sort of half sculpture, half architecture, and is responding to existing architecture. Announcing the location of this one is going to be really key, and so we're really excited to share that when we're ready to share it. But it's going to be really incredible. So they're building a structure that's going to work as sort of an accessible and occupiable space for performance and other collaborations, as well as a sculpture in its own right.
Yeah, it's really exciting, and I think again, like many of our artists, the work really becomes alive when people are performing on it, they're walking through it or over it, which I think is going to be really a great experience for people. And so from if you just joined and you're wondering, like, well, I'm a volunteer in ArtPrize years. What does this mean for me? I think there's all sorts of volunteer opportunities actually starting earlier in the year in comparison to ArtPrize years, with some of these sew-in events happening, potentially supporting some of the installations that will be taking place through the summer.
Yeah.
But then, of course, helping us really welcome visitors from near and far to the event itself, and helping us host those Saturday events and things like that. So a lot for volunteers to do this year, and I think a lot of new and dynamic roles that we haven't had in the past to work alongside the artists.
Yeah.
So I think that's exciting.
Yeah.
And then from a visitor standpoint, same, we talked about this all along the way, but the art is really meant to be explored and interacted with in different ways. And so I think for our visitors, we want to encourage people to spend more time with these pieces, really dive into what the artists are saying through their work, but also participate and be a part of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So should we answer some questions?
Yeah.
We got some questions through Facebook and Instagram and Twitter in the run-up to this broadcast. So let's see. What happens to the fabric from Amanda's installation after the exhibition closes? So Amanda actually commented on this comment, so we know her answer. She says everything is saved. Many times the work is shown at other locations, museums, etc., honoring all the people who helped sew and volunteer their time. Yeah, so I was visiting Amanda's studio in New York last week, and she has bins and bins and bins of fabric. Some of it is yet to be used. Some of it, a lot of it is actually previous works, previous installations. And then some of those can be reinstalled in certain cases. The longer that these fabric works are outside, they do take a toll from the weather. Rain and wind and sun actually can fade some of the color. So, so they don't have like an unlimited life. But she's also figured out different ways to sort of, use these installations and give them longer lives in different ways.
Yeah, so I imagine she's going to be inspired by the things she'll learn about the community as she's doing these sew-ins that might then morph into how they live on past the event, which is fun. So another question, will Project 1 be smaller than ArtPrize?
We've gotten this question from when we first announced the shift to ArtPrize being a biennial and Project 1 back in the summer. And it depends on how you measure it. So it's longer than ArtPrize. ArtPrize is 2.5 weeks. Project 1 is 7 weeks. The artist list is, of course, much, much smaller. The typical ArtPrize year has around 1,500 artists. Project 1 has 5. But the scale of these projects are much larger than anything you typically see within an ArtPrize year, with very few exceptions of ArtPrize projects that I can think of that would be on the scale of what we're talking about. Only a handful throughout the 10 years have really reached that. And really these projects are much more involved. I think part of what we're doing and how we're thinking about programming this is, we have a longer lead time because we've already been talking to these artists for several months, all of them. And we have several months to go before install, and then once it's up, we have this full 7-week run. And so we can think about how can we build out community engagement, how can we build out exploration and the kind of meaning and investigation of these works in a way that has a different pace and a different depth. And I'm really excited about that because as much as I love ArtPrize and love the format of ArtPrize, it's much more of a festival feeling where it's very quick, and most of the artwork you see, you've got to only spend a few seconds with it because you've got to keep going because you want to vote and you want to see all of the finalists or whatever at whatever point you're at visiting the event. And so it has a very different kind of cadence to it. So this is bigger in the sense that there's a lot more depth. Yeah,
I agree, and I think much to what we talked about, I think the engagement with the community potentially has a much longer tail because if, for example, with Amanda Browder and her work, she'll begin engaging the communities in which she's citing as early summer and leading all the way into the event. So I think the impact and the connections that will be formed with these artists and the community is much greater potentially than what we might see in other years. So,
next question that we have in our pre-question list is, will there be any voting and prizes? There will not. As I mentioned near the beginning of the broadcast, the shift in how we're allocating resources in terms of the money that we raise to give to artists. In ArtPrize years, there are some grants, but primarily that chunk of money is the prizes, as we all know. But for Project 1, this the big idea here is, what if we took that and invested in these projects and really helped develop them from a very practical standpoint in terms of fabrication and installation and all of that. but then also, really helping artists connect with the community through research and community outreach and everything else that's needed to make projects that are this complex be successful.
Yeah, so that investment that we typically award at the end of ArtPrize and prizes, we've now loaded to the upfront and put those out into commissions with these 5 artists. So, and then we also mentioned earlier, voting is one way that we ask visitors to engage with the art in ArtPrize years. Of course, there's lots of other ways people get involved. But this year, we're excited to challenge our artists to help us think about new ways to engage audience and how they're really thinking critically about the art and what the artist is saying and how they're getting involved in it. And, and so we're excited about that.
Yeah, that was one thing that we kind of, started to talk about internally after 10 years of ArtPrize was the vote is such a great engagement tool. It's not the end-all be-all. I mean, hopefully your engagement and your thinking about an artwork goes beyond simply whether or not you want to give it a thumbs up. It's a bit shallow level, but it's a great intro and it's a great game to get people to care about artists and to start looking. But there's a lot of other ways to do that, and so that's part of what we wanted to do with Project One is build these collaborative relationships with artists where we can work with them early on and be like, what do people do? How are they involved? And what does this mean to people? Not just what does it look like.
Right. And last, another question, can I have a job?
Maybe.
So there's a lot of different ways to potentially get involved with us from a job standpoint. We will be posting several seasonal opportunities on our website, so stay tuned for that. We also have a fantastic internship program that Kendall College of Art and Design of Fair State University underwrites, and that will continue this year, so stay tuned for internship opportunities. We talked about volunteer opportunities, and those will start to post this spring. So lots of different ways, depending on what you're looking for to get involved with us. We also have some full-time positions listed right now.
We do.
Program.
Yeah.
So, bring your talent.
We have some jobs. What's that?
Oh, okay. We're getting the wrap-up.
We're hitting the wrap-up sign. All right. We've done plenty.
So we mentioned this. We announced artists. Yay, our 5 artists. We're going to be announcing where they will be cited very soon. So stay tuned for that, and stay tuned for all the wonderful opportunities and news that we'll be posting through the spring about ways you can get involved. And we couldn't be more excited about this year.
It's going to be great. Thanks. Is it still going? Still going.